All right, we will go ahead and get started. We may have some people wandering in as we start talking, just because this is the first time we've held this a panel in this building, so I know some students may still be trying to find us. My name is Leslie Pointer. I work in the Center for Career Development here on campus and specifically advise students in the College of Communication as well as students in humanities, Englishes, just things like that. And this is the fourth time I think we've done this specific Career Conversations panel. So we're really excited to have some great panelists here today. I will ask a few questions and then open it up to the audience. I want to make sure that you guys are here to get any questions you may have about the industry answered. So I will just start off with having each of our panelists just introduce yourself and what you currently do. Sorry, no, you don't have to start every time.
Sure, we can start here and go to. Hi everyone, I'm Sandelli. I'm interim head of our teaching and learning programs in Hodges Library, so just a little bit across campus. And my job involves working with librarians who teach online and in-person undergraduate instruction, and then also thinking about graduate students, distance education students, and the different ways that the libraries interact with teaching and learning. And one thing that most people don't know about the libraries are that we are one of the heaviest teaching institutes on campus. We see about 20,000 students in some form throughout the year.
I'm DeLena Feliciano. I work at the Knoxville Museum of Art as the Assistant Director of Education. And my duties range anything from creating education programs for kids to adult lecture series, any kind of public programming that we do, as well as training our docents on the new exhibitions and running all of the tour programs as well.
Hey y'all, my name is Ari Baker. I work at Blount County Public Library in Maryville, so real close to here, about 20 minutes away. I am the Education Services Manager. It's a new job title. I feel like all of my job titles are like incredibly made up. And basically what that means is I coordinate public educational programs for folks of all ages. So technology classes, workforce development, adult literary events, grant writing, and other duties as assigned. So it's exactly as weird and broad as it sounds.
Also have a very weird and broad title. I'm Natalie Hansen. I work at Y12 National Security Complex. Technically my title is Digital Archivist, although it's just kind of become a catch-all for media archives right now. Because Y12 National Security Complex is a government entity, it's part of the Department of Energy. We take photographic records, video records, we make graphics and things like that, and all of those are scheduled as government records. So I take care of basically all of our visual material, whether that be 16mm film or digital photographs, all of them. So I see a range of media materials that I'm responsible for preserving and describing and making accessible to the plant population and also, United States taxpayers.
My name is Katy Malone. I am the Curator of Academic Programs at the Mcclung Museum right next door. Hopefully you are very familiar with us. And I, as Curator of Academic Programs, I do what I like to say is the big kid education. So basically I work with college level education up to adult and even into our creative aging populations. So I do a lot of programming, I do a lot of coordination, I do a lot of solicitation of faculty and try to show the university and the community writ large how to utilize the museum as part of their learning and experience and enjoyment and all of those fun things.
Thank you. So we'll delve a little bit more into each of your backgrounds. So talking more about how you got to where you are, what your education, what your degree or degrees are in, and maybe an experience on how you got to what you're doing now.
Want me to start this time, Anna?
Sure.
So I took a kind of circuitous path into museum education. I started my career as a biologist, and I worked in the laboratory. So my first degree is in biology and chemistry, and I was a microbiologist, and microscopist, a lot of ists. And then I went back to school and got an MFA in studio art. So when I was getting my MFA, I realized that I was being groomed for faculty art teaching. And I, taught a few classes, and I even adjuncted once I got out of school, but I realized that wasn't really the thing for me. I liked teaching and loved being around students. I love the academic environment, but it wasn't necessarily through that channel. So in a very roundabout way, I started doing arts administration first. I worked for government agencies as a public art administrator. And then I moved into nonprofit and government agency work as an art administrator. And through that, I then found museums and really was able to kind of build a level of expertise in administration to where I was able to then kind of work my way into museum education, especially for older populations. So is that a good summary? I could go on. There's a lot more, but yeah, I'll save it.
I also took a very circuitous route. I actually started at University of Nebraska majoring in art history, oddly enough. I then got my first master's degree at University of York in the UK in medieval studies. Not a whole lot to do with Y12. I was getting my PhD in art history at University of Illinois. There's a lot of things that happened in 2008 and 2009, if anybody, probably all too young to remember, but financial markets being what they were. And also I kind of noticed that my interest is kind of waning in art history, but also kind of looking towards something else. I took part in a digital humanities project with the National Science Foundation and found out that just really making things accessible, especially medieval manuscripts, things that I had to fly to England to see, all of these things were becoming really important. And there was like a whole career path for people who wanted to work with, art and archives and digitize things. So I ended up coming to University of Tennessee and enrolling in the SIS program with Dr. Susie Allard as my advisor. So I took an interest in digital libraries, basically just kind of threw myself into the whole thing, thought I'd be an art archivist. The summer after my first year, Dr. Allard comes to me and says, Y12 National Security Complex needs somebody to make a digital library for them. I was like, I had just taken digital libraries, but that was it, so it was kind of like being thrown into the deep end of the ocean. So I went and interviewed with them, and they handed me a wish list of things they needed. We need to be able to find all our images easily, because right now we can't find any of them. We need them preserved, because right now they're just on CDs, and any one of them could be lost at any given time, which is a bad thing. Right. So I started working as a graduate assistant. It became very clear that they needed a full-time archivist to manage all of their media. And coincidentally, that became me, since I helped design the library. So it's kind of a long route between studying medieval stained glass to, archiving photographs of machinery like calutrons, video of people building reactors, things like that. You learn really quickly when thrown into a science field, really what that's all about. But yeah, kind of a circuitous route.
So my undergraduate is in sociology, and I had a certification in nonprofit management. And when I started my undergraduate degree, I took one of those career tests, and my top result was librarian. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I shelved books in high school. That sucked. Like, I don't want that to be my job. So I was like, went sort of the nonprofit route and worked with a lot of organizations doing event planning and fundraising and grant writing and that sort of stuff. And then I was working in the cafe at my library during college. And then I learned what libraries actually do. And I was like, oh, this is rocks. Never mind. Just kidding. I was judging based on my high school experience of shelving books, and that's not at all what libraries do. And so a lot of the expertise and stuff I had developed with nonprofit management was really applicable to public libraries. I do all of that stuff today, a lot of community engagement, a lot of grant writing, a lot of fundraising. So all of that stuff is now actually my job, but my background was in nonprofit management. I went to also the School of Information Science here on this floor that we're on. And yeah, I graduated in 2015. And I worked in the cafe, and then I worked in the children's library, and then I worked in reference doing adult services. And then I became in charge of all of those things eventually, which I think is what I'm doing now, I think. So, yeah.
So I kind of worked my way from the ground up. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in two-dimensional studio art. So, but I'm not drawing and painting for my job right now, although sometimes I get to. I started out as a volunteer at the front desk at the Knoxville Museum of Art right after college for a couple of months. And then I moved to Atlanta on a whim and worked at the High Museum of Art in their gift shop for 2 years, which was a really great experience to learn how a bigger museum works. And then when I came back home to Knoxville, I got a part-time job as a visitor services representative in the galleries at the Knoxville Museum of Art, which was a really good experience to get to know the organization, the collection, and just the staff. And getting to the staff was probably my biggest help in moving forward. At the time, we did not have a manager for our people, so eventually they asked me if I would like to be full-time and be the visitor services manager. And I said, sure. We had like maybe 6 to 8 people working as VSRs, which is what we call them. And then they're like, but also you're going to be over the volunteers. We had 200 volunteers. So I delved in, I learned how to do everything. I kind of built my position from scratch. And then after being in that position for 6 years, I applied for a position that had opened up as the Assistant Director of Education. And so I convinced them that my job had really become 2 jobs. So I now manage my previous jobs as well. So that is now Visitor Services Manager, who is over the VSRs, and then a volunteer coordinator. So right now I manage them as well as taking care of the education department staff too. So really, it was just a matter of getting experience and working my way through the process of being in different positions at the museum. I rarely said no to things and worked a lot of extra hours. I did an internship when I was in college as a gallery assistant, and that was a lot of helpful experience as well to kind of push me through that. But also I worked retail full-time while I was working part-time as a VSR, and was kind of on a management course in retail, which helped me get the manager position at the museum. So every little bit helps. No matter what you're doing, it pays off in some way.
Well, growing up, I really wanted to be a detective because I like to read mystery books, and then I also like to write. And so when I got to college, I became a journalism major because I couldn't major in detectiving, I guess. But I really enjoyed my journalism major and had a lot of internships, really saw myself writing for like a newspaper or a magazine, and then I graduated during the recession and there weren't a lot of those jobs available. And so I took a position in a publicly traded apparel and footwear company doing corporate communications and investor relations, which sounds like a lot, but I got to do a lot of writing for that. They had about 44,000 employees around the world, and they had an employee intranet. And so part of my job was writing stories for that every day, and putting news content and videos on it. And I realized after about a year that I wasn't enjoying the writing as much as I was enjoying thinking about connecting people and thinking about resources, and was not really enjoying the job, but not quite sure what to do next. A lot of the people that I work with had masters in business administration. I thought about getting a master's in medical journalism and looked into both of those options. And then I was on a vacation with some friends, and a friend who was a third grade teacher was going back to get a master's in library science. And where I had gotten my undergraduate degree, UNC Chapel Hill, the journalism school was directly across from the School of Library Science, but I had never thought about libraries. I think kind of the same thing. I had this perception of libraries being where you got books or took books out, and hadn't thought about any programs there. But when my friend told me that she was going from being a third grade teacher to getting her master's in library science, I started to look at the program website. And when I looked at the classes and the offerings and the different things that I could do with the master's degree in library science, it really interested me. And I applied for the program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, not really knowing if I was interested in being in an academic library or a public library, or just kind of wanting to see where it would take me. But I got a scholarship to be part of an academic library associates program. So I actually worked, we had an undergraduate library, and I worked there and got to do teaching, outreach, developing programs for undergraduate students, and I really liked it. And so when I graduated and started to look for jobs, the University of Tennessee had a position opening for a student success librarian. And it was a job title that I hadn't seen before, but it really appealed to me because it had the teaching piece, it had outreach and communications, marketing, event planning, thinking about ways to support student success. And I hadn't seen that in any other job title. So I applied for that and started here in 2014. And then last year was asked to be head of our teaching and learning programs, which is a new department that's thinking about teaching and learning more broadly. So circuitous, I think, like everyone else has said, and kind of taking advantage of opportunities when they came.
Thank you. I have one more, and then I'll open it up to anyone else who's interested in asking questions. Can you each just describe what a typical day looks like? It probably looks different across time, but or maybe what you did today.
You want me to start again?
Yeah, we can start. I can start since you
Sure.
So definitely, it's hard to find a typical day. I think every day is a little bit different, and sometimes how you think a day will start is very different than how it actually goes, which is probably the case for all of us and for all of you too. So today, for example, I started off with a meeting to talk about the different ways that the libraries could teach and the ways that we can support undergraduate research and different types of classes or workshops or offerings that we could have for students at UT. And then I'm on a group called Library Council, which is people within the UT libraries that supervise, and we meet once a month to share updates, to have announcements, sometimes to plan events or to work through things together. So between those two meetings, that took up about 3 hours this morning. And then I spent some time catching up on emails and scheduling other meetings and having a chance to work on things there. And I had, these weren't planned meetings, but somehow between walking from my desk to go fill up my water bottle, I had like 2 meetings in the hallway. One to talk about classes that we'd like to think about in the future, and one to think about an event that we're doing with our student advisory committee later this semester. And then I had the chance to be part of a class that one of my colleagues is teaching for first-year students called Adventure Narratives. And so they're thinking about writing about the outdoors, exploring the outdoors. And so I got to sit into that class and hear more about it, and then also talk about research strategies for reading and finding things about nature. And then answered a few more emails and came here. But a typical day, if there is such a thing, can involve meetings and planning. It can involve going to different things on campus, coming to things in this building. I work a lot with other groups on campus, like our undergraduate research, our writing center, our teaching and learning innovation group. So it's never boring.
Yeah, one thing working in museums and libraries is not boring. Every day is pretty much different. I guess I'll kind of start with last night. I just had an artist lecture and demo last night with Carl Gombert, who's a local artist.
From Maryville.
Yeah, from Maryville. He
Yeah, I love
teaches
Carl.
at Maryville College, and he has worked in our museum as well as in our gift shop. So that was fun. I do everything from order the food from Publix to put out the tablecloths and steal flowers off people's desks to use as centerpieces. And so that was a lot of fun. And then, of course, I had to clean up from all that and come back in the next morning. I got out at 8 o'clock. If you work in museums, you will work evenings and weekends. So just know that no matter what level you get to, you'll still be there for evening and weekend events. So then this morning, I had meetings pretty much all day today, but a lot of my days are spent just emailing and setting things up. I'm working on programming for next spring already to get lecturers to come during specific events, because our annual calendar, our 3 times a year calendar has to be turned in at the end of this month for January, because it has to go to publication. So that's always thinking ahead is something that I have to do more now than before. So this morning I started out with a brainstorming meeting with a group at our museum called Art House, and that is like our young professionals level membership program to get people involved in the museum and become advocates and participants of the museum process. So that's fun. We plan a lot of programming to bring people kind of into the fold of what museums do and art collecting and visiting studios and stuff like that. And then I rushed back to meet a new docent. So our docents are our tour guides. They're all volunteers, and you can be a docent. We have some college level docents who are really good. You just have to have a little bit of time set aside to commit to that. But she is new to the area as well as new to the museum. So we're going through the process of what she needs to learn about our permanent collection in order to be ready to give tours. Usually takes about 3 months to train a docent to be ready to give full tours. And then I checked a few emails, tried to eat lunch, and then had another meeting with our interpretation working group, which is where I sit down with my boss, our director, and our curator, and we work out programming. And again, we're working on next spring. We have a fantastic show about the artist Buford DeLena from Knoxville, who was a good friend of the author James Baldwin, and that exhibit will be in February through May of 2020. And so we're working out all the logistics for not only our programming, but the ones that we're coordinating with UT and the Beck Cultural Exchange Center and the Knox County Public Library. So we collaborate a lot with the community on our programming. And then I dabbed on some powder and ran over here. So I do have a lot of meetings on a daily basis, it seems, but then a lot of like email communication between the docents and the upcoming programs, and just sending contracts and reminders to your speakers. Like if I don't get my reminder out soon enough, they're not reminded in time, and then it's like scrambling last minute to get stuff done for programs and stuff. But it's a lot of fun, and I meet a ton of cool people from around the community and get to work with them. It's just been really great.
So echoing what everyone said, I think a lot of our work, especially if you're doing programming, is very project-based, so your day is not going to look the same every day. And I don't remember where I'm supposed to be without this paper calendar that's literally in front of me, so I just turned a page back. And this morning I had a phone conversation with a media partner. Has anyone heard of Scalawag Magazine at all? They tell like Southern stories, right? And kind of complicating, Scalawag Magazine, complicating narratives about the South. And they're covering our literary festival, which I'm planning in November. It's Cormac McCarthy Literary Festival, which is a little tongue-in-cheek. It's like he hates Knoxville. We also hate him. And so it's going to be a bop. But talking about media, getting reporters and photographers to come to that event, which was cool. And then I worked on a grant for digitizing our archives collection that's due on Monday, and I'm off on the weekend, so I'm like frantically writing it. You'll never get good at not writing your papers before they're due, even when they're important grants. Or unless, I guess I didn't. That's my takeaway for that. I taught a class. I teach recovery court, so we partner with our local recovery court to provide life skills classes. So it's a lot of technology, workforce development. We did a class today about job interviews, where they're like playing the role of the job interviewer to kind of go through the process of talking about like best practices for job interviews. And so I did that. I do those four times a week. And then I had to do statistics for our board reports. So I did that while I was sitting up here before I came in. And yeah, yesterday I was on Live at 5 at 4 talking about a bike safety class we have this weekend. Saturday before or this past Saturday that just happened, we had our open lab, so we have like 3D printing, and we had a coding class for kids. And so everything is really like, it feels like when I say it aloud, I'm like, wow, that's like just a bunch of random stuff, which is like, that's what libraries do, it's just like a bunch of random stuff. So it feels very disparate, but coordinating those educational programs, and similarly a lot of like evening and weekend and flexibility and flexible schedule things. And I'm grateful that I work in a position where I can sort of set my own schedule, so it makes that working evenings or weekends or scheduling my time around classes or workshops or events a little easier. But yeah.
Well, my job's a little bit different in that I get to pretty much choose what projects I'm going to work on during the day. There's probably 10 people could have my job, you know, and actually split it up into 10 little jobs. So for example, this morning I worked with our photographers to help describe all their photographs that they had taken this week. So my example is always, if a raccoon gets stuck in an air vent, we have to catalog that, and I have to describe that photograph and then, you know, save it, schedule it for government records. So we went through and described all those photographs. We added double and core metadata to it, and I put it in the visual asset library, which is basically it's our library / archive that I helped to design for Y12 media. So it holds graphics, videos, photographs, everything basically. So I help populate that. Then I can sit and watch all of our lovely 16mm film that needs cataloged. About 5 years ago, there was brought to my attention that in the oldest building on the plant, there was something like 350 miles of motion picture film sitting in a dirty, flooded basement. It was also quite alarming to find out that that was footage of every reactor ever built in Oak Ridge. Needless to say, we got it out of there, and it is now being cataloged for the first time. So a lot of this stuff is stuff we've, you know, seen for the first time since the 50s. So there's every reactor ever built in Oak Ridge, transportation tests. So they'll drop rail cars off giant towers, and you can watch footage of that. That's actually kind of fun. A lot of people don't know, but they actually did a lot of biology work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So sometimes every now and then I'll find a film and it's just monkey surgery, but it's not labeled like that, so you just freak out. I wasn't ready for monkey surgery this morning. You know, it could be anything. I'm also in charge of our photographic negatives. Those surprisingly also hadn't been cataloged, and they do need to be offered to the National Archives. So we're actually taking those out, cleaning those, actually writing a description for the first time, because a lot of them are just marked areas. It's not very helpful when you have, you know, hundreds of buildings on your site. Areas isn't a good description. So I might be working on a plan to process all this film. I might be overseeing interns helping me write these descriptions. I might be working on a plan to migrate our digital library forward. You know, we're talking about using a different platform, and what are some of the features we'd like in our digital library. We're talking about making improvements to our metadata capture system. So all the information that we use to describe our photographs, graphics, videos, they all go into this one system, and it outputs this beautiful little XML that I can then put into the library. So what are some things, you know, that we can improve upon to make that process more efficient? Looking at workflows between graphic designers and photographers. How can we make this pipeline more efficient? So it's a lot about efficiency, but it's also a lot about history and describing visual images. And there's just a lot of components to the work. And it's all just, it's very interesting. And again, every day could be different, but I get to pretty much set my own schedule. So if I don't feel like watching monkey surgery, I don't have to watch monkey surgery. I've got something like 20 other projects I can go work on, right? So it's pretty flexible, really. The deadlines are only, you know, as quick as the film can rot, right? So, which is yesterday, but yeah, it rots fast, yeah. But you know, it's pretty flexible. You pretty much get to do whatever you feel like doing that day, and that's kind of cool. So yeah, days can be very, very different.
Yeah, same. So for me today, this morning, I woke up and was texting with our natural history curator. He wanted me to go out into the field to go to the Nolichucky River with him to look at mussel specimen, but I told him I had too much to do and couldn't go play in the water, which was a big disappointment for me because that sounded like a great way to spend the day. But so I was texting with him at 7 a.m. But then I went into the office and spent a lot of my morning reading label copy for an exhibition that we're opening in the spring. Our exhibition is about medieval art and how medieval artists depicted the apocalypse. So I was reading the label copy that was written by our subject matter expert and trying to find ways to make it accessible to the everyman, because not everybody has that marvelous level of knowledge that our art historian does. So I was taking his label copy and trying to find ways to either you know, make the language more easily understood, to find places where I didn't understand things, even though I have been reading about this topic since this exhibition started 2 years ago, and trying to, you know, basically pull out the nuggets of the story. So while I was doing that, I was also emailing, because you multitask all the time, and writing people and emailing back and forth. I was also communicating with the British Film Institute, because we are borrowing some films from 1896 to show for a program I have coming up. So I was negotiating how to get them into the UT payment system so we could pay them to use their films and figure out international tax laws, and that's always interesting. I also spent part of my day looking at, we're installing an exhibition right now on photographs from the mid-1900s, like 1930 to 1950, that showed scientific concepts. So I went up to the gallery, I looked inside, and I looked at how things were placed to see if that would work for when I bring groups in to do tours. So helping to lay out the exhibition. Then, speaking of my film program I have coming up, about an hour before this program, I went over to the music building to hear a composition that would go alongside those silent films, to hear what a student composer was going to create for us as part of that program. So my day consisted of reading about medieval art, reading about biblical history, trying to interpret that so that I think it would be accessible to normal everyday people who are not specialists in those areas. A ton of emailing, ton of writing, ton of communicating on all kinds of levels. And then having a meeting and hearing people's creative process and learning about electronic music composition, which was so interesting and so cool and so fun, and watching silent films that are from some of the very first films ever created, and it was a pretty quiet day. That was a really quiet day for me. It's usually there's about 20 other things that go on in the day. Usually there are groups coming in and I'm giving tours, or I am training my graduate assistant to give tours, or I'm helping to manage an event. Last night we were open late for the 225 anniversary, so making sure that we actually had staff around. It's every day is different, and it's the best job in the world, but it utilizes all skills across the board, all communication, all level of skill.
Thank you. I want to open it up to the audience. I have more questions I can ask, but I want to make sure you get your question answered.
You can check out that exhibition. That's great.
We have some people joining us via Zoom, and I do have one question on here. It's actually for DeLena specifically. There was someone, they were looking at their museum staff page and wanted to know if collections manager is the same as a registrar for a museum, or what are the differences between those two titles?
That's a good question.
That one might be a little bit harder for me to answer. Every museum can be a little bit different in their specific jobs that go under those titles, but the registrar is very similar to the collections manager, but it can just depend on specific jobs. It was collections manager. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, that one's kind of a difficult question. A lot of times, the registrar has much more like archival, and maybe Katy can help me out on this one, because she'll have those positions as well.
So a collections manager would specifically manage a collection being housed by a museum. So it's a little more, not every museum has a collection. And a registrar may also oversee loans. So they would also take care of the things coming and going from the museum. Now that line is really blurry. Often it's one and the same at a museum. Usually there's one person that does both things. There may be a museum that has someone who acts as a registrar and then someone who acts as a collections manager. But there's a lot of overlap, but I would say that that's kind of a delineation.
Yeah, and like our registrar just changed his title more to collections manager, and he's going to deal specifically with our permanent collection pieces, which we have a lot in storage, so we'll focus more on rotating those out. And we just started a new position that will be exhibits manager, and so they will focus just on helping bring in the new exhibitions and getting those ready and up for people to see. If that helps.
Any other questions? It could be for a specific panelist or for everyone. Okay, I have another one. So I work with a lot of students that are interested in this field, and a question I get is always, what type of graduate degree do I need to get? I think a lot of you have graduate degrees, but there's a lot of different options, and it can be overwhelming when you are doing that research. So if you want to maybe just give more, talk more about your specific degree and maybe other degrees that students could look into, or does it have to be the specific information sciences master's degree?
I'll start. So it's at least in the museum world, the field is getting more and more professionalized. So there are degree programs that are museum studies, or museum studies certificates, or even museum education master's programs. And if you're really, if you are very certain that museum is for you, I would recommend going that route. You will get a lot of really good specific knowledge, for the museum field. It's very specified, very niche, I would say, but it would still be, that's becoming more and more the route. It's getting more and more rare that someone like me who doesn't have one of those degrees gets into my kind of role. And my route was built over time, you know, after 15 years in the field and building experience and kind of being, you know, gaining that ability to maneuver. That being said, in the museum world, there's also a huge value to networking and knowing people and the community. So if you know, kind of take DeLena's route and volunteer and get involved and engage, you can kind of work your way in still, even to this day, because museum field is small. We all know each other. If we don't know each other directly, then we know somebody who knows somebody. And you have somebody vouching for you as a great person who has, you know, some good skills, it'll really help you get into the field. Yeah.
I'll say a thing. So I think it's worth acknowledging that like master's degrees in public libraries is a contentious topic. I think for a lot of our rural libraries, you'd be hard pressed to find a master's degree holding librarian. And that's changing, I think. There's also something called the Public Library Management Institute that's run through Tennessee State Library and Archives, so that folks that are working full-time in libraries can have access to some training they need to do that job well. I think in larger library systems and in urban libraries, that expectation is that you have a master's degree in information science. I also think the field is changing in a way, especially if you're in a larger system, things like marketing and communications is a big need for libraries. We have somebody with a master's degree in public administration. And so I think information science or library science is definitely a focus route, but there are other higher degrees I think needed, especially in larger systems. And then also the reality that like not everybody who works in libraries needs a master's degree to do the things they're doing. And it's a touchy subject, I think, especially in professional organizations in the state. And yeah, it's a weird, and it's also, I think, a power and equity sort of question as well, that's complicated of like, are you a real librarian if you don't have a master's degree? And like, I was doing a lot of the same work prior to having that piece of paper, and it's nice to be able to have that piece of paper and the ability to move to a different system or different location and be insured, or more likely to be insured a certain pay level, or, you know, meet qualifications. But yeah, I think that's a complicated question too, if you're in the field, so.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, more and more they're looking for the information science degree in archives as well. And I think there's some value to having the master's degree in information science. I didn't focus primarily on archives because there was no such focus at SIS. But just having the foundational core of information science helps a lot, especially if you're an archivist and the media keeps changing. So you might not know how to work with, you know, this specific coding language, but you understand the basics of coding language, right? You might not understand, you know, every little nuance of your daily life, but you know how to learn, you know. So having a basic foundation for archival theory helps you put that into practice later. So I would say that there is some value in having the information science degree. I would say as an undergraduate though, you know, anything there, we archive everything. There are specifically people from music archives, engineering librarians and archivists, architectural archives. You know, there are people who curate big data, things like that. They work on interoperability between systems. There's a lot of different things you can do with that information science degree, and in the archival field in general. So I wouldn't say that I'd say that the degree is incredibly helpful, and it is incredibly flexible if you do want to get it. So.
I would maybe add to that. So one thing that's interesting for academic libraries is that it differs by your library. And so at UT, we are considered faculty. So a requirement for my job was to have a master's degree from American Library Association accredited school. And as an expectation of being faculty, I've talked a lot about the teaching part of my job because it's the start of the semester and my mind is focused on teaching, but we're also expected to engage in research and to do service to the university, to the library, and to the profession. And so that's something to consider longer term if that's something that you're interested in a career, if you want a career where there's an expectation of research or service in addition to the degree. I also think that there's flexibility and opportunities. We have staff members in our library who don't have master's degrees or who started in a staff position and then got a master's degree as they were working and got it from here. And so that's an option as well, especially if you're starting out and you're interested in seeing what's out there and maybe taking a break between undergraduate and graduate school and seeing what types of things interest you, working in maybe different library or archive or museum capacities. Another thing that's maybe interesting to consider is depending on the type of librarianship that you're interested in, having a second master's degree or a different degree could be an asset. So we have here at UT, we have librarians for every major on campus. We have an engineering librarian, a business librarian, and all of those librarians have their master's in library science or master's in information science, but some of them also have advanced degrees in business or a PhD in information sciences, a second master's degree in English. And I would say that's not a requirement of the job, but it's something that can make a stronger candidate if you know that you're if you're very much interested in a specific subject area or a specific type of librarianship. And then I agree too that it is an evolving conversation. We had some new positions open recently, and one of them was in digital scholarship, and we had a really interesting discussion about whether that was a position where we would require a master's degree from an American Library Association accredited school, or if we would accept other master's or doctoral degrees in digital humanities, in English, or in other fields. So I think it's a really interesting conversation.
That's a good segue into my next question, which was specifically for Ari and Anna, just the difference between being a public librarian and academic librarian. I know, Anna, you mentioned some things, but if there's anything else, kind of those main differences for those who are considering either or.
Do you want to go ahead?
Well, now I'm thinking.
Yeah, I guess I'm like thinking about like the similarities. So for my position, instruction is a similarity. So I do instruction and technology classes and library resources, a lot of workforce development. Like I said, that lot like soft skills and life skills for different user populations. I think, I'm trying to think of differences. Like
maybe there are more similarities.
I think the user groups are different, right? Like that's a
that's serving a university community versus a county or a.
But I think it's a really, really similar, right? Like, I thought about doing academic librarianship, and I applied for a job one time as an academic librarian, but I didn't get it. So I'm glad I didn't. It worked out. It was a weird time in my life. I think a lot of it is really similar. I think it's you're doing a lot of the same, connecting people with resources, giving people access to information, doing programming and events and engagement stuff, connecting people to those resources through those events and programming and engagement stuff, and just for different user populations. So
and the more I'm hearing about your job, I'm like, that sounds cool.
Yeah, and also I don't have to deal with professors.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
Faculty piece is a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's a different population, understanding faculty needs and student needs, and the expectation of research, which is hard sometimes because I think if you're in meetings and you're doing events and teaching all day, having time to research and having that as an expectation might be a difference. But I think there's a lot of similarities as well. And I feel like academic libraries are and could be better by learning from public libraries when it comes to engagement and outreach and events. And I think one thing that I love about working at UT is that we're really focused on events and engagement. I don't spend a lot of time in my office. I might be at the 225th anniversary celebration. We've done murder mysteries in our library. We have a speed library that we just opened up to the community. So those kind of outward facing things I think are similar, and I think like are ways to learn. there isn't anyone on this panel from a community college library, but I work closely with community college librarians. I'm our liaison librarian for transfer students. So I work with librarians at Pellissippi and Walters State Community Colleges, and hearing about their type of librarianship could be interesting as well. I think there's similarities to both.
They're kind of like in between public, because they serve as a community center for their community a lot of the times, and also a community center for their academic institution. And so, yeah, community colleges are kind of this like in between place between public libraries and academic libraries.
And they might be another interesting avenue to consider.
Thank you. Any questions first? I want to open it up. Any more? Do you have one?
I have one for Art.
Yes.
This might not be the question for you, but it's just something I've been curious about. How does a library decide what gets put in the library? What is that what books do you stock? What films do you stock? How does that get decided?
Yeah, so
this is for our Zoom folks. I want to repeat that question.
Oh,
so
great,
they can hear it. So I think you said, how do libraries decide what types of content, whether that be books or films, to put in the rotation, right? In the library.
Yeah, cool. So we have a collection development manager who is ultimately like a solitary person responsible for the majority of the ordering, which is wild for a library of my size that there's like a person doing that. And so in order to make that like a possible reality, we use some services from vendors. So some things are just on auto order. Like we don't place orders for things. We just like give them a certain chunk of money a year, and things like bestsellers and popular fiction, popular children's titles and things like that just come to our library automatically, and we just like catalog them as they come. So we don't pick those particular items just because there's so much, right? Like there's, so those things that are expected popular titles you would expect a library to have, those just auto order from, I think we use Baker and Taylor as our vendor, that's not important. And then also we have some particular sort of like, in an academic institution, they would be like subject librarians, but people who are like watching different specific parts of the collections, like our local history collection and like different sort of broad categories that are heavily used, that they kind of recommend items or fill in gaps. And then people request things a lot. So we have people request items, and we try and purchase items that people request, up to I think 3 items a month until we run out of money for the year. And so, I think that's, Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Any other questions from our audience? Keep going, there's no picture. What are the biggest challenges in each of your positions? Or the field as a whole?
It's like the what is your biggest weakness question. It's feels loaded. It's like,
I think there are a few in museums. One of the ugly sides, at least in education and in events and in programming, is burnout. We love what we do. We wouldn't be doing it. We're not hedge fund managers, so we are typically choosing a job of passion. And you can really, out of your desire to serve and out of your desire to keep doing more, kind of work yourself to the ground. And that's a problem that we talk about in the field a lot, and try to figure out how to work around. And also, if you're at a smaller institution and you're trying, you only have like 1 or 2 staff members that are doing a certain thing, then it gets really challenging to be the jack of all trades. And I would say in my job, one of the things that I love, because I find it a fun riddle and a fun challenge, is, but also sometimes it just makes me want to curse the stars a little bit, is a lot of personality management. So I collaborate with people all across the campus, all across the community, and sometimes it's really easy and wonderful, and sometimes it's a little more difficult, and it's always kind of like managing or understanding what people's motivations are and trying to meet those needs. And sometimes I want one thing and they wanted something different, and how do I serve them, or how do I provide what they want? within the means of what the museum can provide and still walk away with everybody happy. So that's a challenge that I have in my personal job, but I think burnout is something that we,
Yeah.
what would you say, DeLena?
Overload's a big one. You talked about doing multiple things. Everybody at museums wears multiple hats. Like I said, my last job got turned into 2 jobs because I just kept building them up so much, and that they really had to, it was either I was going to have to divide out and pick one to keep and give it away, and then I was like, no, let's take this position. Somebody else can have this. But I'd also say, like, keep in mind if you're ever working for a nonprofit that, you know, your salary is based off the funding that comes in. So you have to really think about that. Are you willing to work for a little less to be in a position and a career that you want to be in and that you really love? And do you have the passion to, you know, put in those extra hours that you might not be getting paid for in order to make your museum thrive and become bigger and more successful, so that in turn, eventually down the road, you'll make more money and stuff like that. Because every little part, especially in nonprofits, every department contributes towards presenting yourself to the community, who's going to in turn give you funding. And every little thing counts, every little relationship and every little effort that you make on the part of your organization comes back around to support you or not support you. And so that's something that you have to think about if you're going into the nonprofit realm. The KMA is not part of the city of Knoxville. We are completely funded by donations and grants. And so that is something that we are always, you know, considering, and we're doing really good. We didn't used to be that way in the past, but we've grown, and it's been a really great organization to see the changes. When I first started as a visitor services rep, we thought it was great to have 30 people come through the door in a day. Now we look at a day with 200 people as, oh, that's a normal Saturday or that's a normal Friday, and it doesn't faze us at all. So you will see, you know, the benefits and the progress, and to like stay with a company and watch that grow and know that you are a part of it is very rewarding.
I would just like to add, I read this great article earlier this week, and it was about this concept of vocational awe in librarianship and this like service-oriented professions. And I just think it's worth saying that like nonprofits and also government jobs can just be as exploitive as like any other job.
Absolutely.
And job creep and expecting low pay and all of those things are not things that we should settle for, but we're conditioned to because of the service nature of our professions. And so I think that conversation is very real, and I just want to put that in the, it is. No, and I absolutely agree, because I have done all of those same things that you said, and I'm sure everyone at this table has. But just knowing that, like, just because you're going into nonprofit work or you're going into service work does not mean like you will transcend all of the ugly, dirty grossness of capitalism. Like, it's all still there. Your job, you can still be exploited. Like, you know, like, you're still going to suffer with those same things. Like, and you have the benefit of being like, oh, I did this cool thing that helped the community, right? And so like maybe the sense of dread that you have is lessened through that, but it's still all the same. So I think that that's worth.
And I think that's why it's a challenge, because you have to realize that, you know, just because you work for a nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't ask for a raise. It doesn't mean that that funding's not there for you. You just have to kind of understand your organization and where their funding comes from. And I think you made a great point. You know, this is a new conversation too. There's a big conversation in the museum world about whether or not interns should be paid. And in a lot of cases, they really should, because they're basically doing a job. And that's something that you all should look out for if you do take an internship with a nonprofit. Don't let it go on forever. As as an unpaid internship. There has to be a limit, and there are laws to protect you all for stuff like that as well.
One thing,
go ahead.
sorry, just to add to that, that conversation is happening overall, like unpaid internships, are those okay? And we know that there are nonprofits and government agencies that just don't have the funds. Something that the Center for Career Development does have as a resource to students is called the Impact Internship Grant. And it is for fall, spring, and summer. You can apply for this grant if you have an internship at a nonprofit or government agency that is unpaid or maybe even very low paid. You can apply to receive funds, and those funds are for you to live on, to use. They're not going to tuition. You can use it for tuition, but really it's just like a stipend, just as if you were being paid for that internship experience. So that's just a resource I did want to throw out if any of you are looking at unpaid internships. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, it's all right. I was also just going to add that just because we work in jobs of passion doesn't mean that we have to do everything. And every time, and I always try to coach this to people, and I coach it to myself too. I always try to like remind myself is anytime somebody asks me to do something, if I'm already working the full 40 hours plus expected of me, and then something else is being added to my plate, my response now is, well, what would you like for me to put aside? Or what would you like for me to do less of so I can accomplish this new thing? Because I think that, you know, there are only so many hours of the day. Just because you work in a career of passion and of service doesn't mean that you are a slave to your job. And you should be able to kind of turn, you know, keep boundaries up so you can, you know, maintain your sanity.
I'd also kind of like to add that even in a well-funded institution, a place like Y12 or Oak Ridge National Laboratory, there are a lot of government agencies and corporations that do have internal archives, like the one I work in. Even if they're really well funded, even if there's a government mandate that says you have to keep these things, you're still justifying your existence a lot of the time. Why do we need these photographs from the 1960s? Why can't we just get rid of these? I get those questions all the time. Well, they're permanent government records owned by the taxpayers. That's not usually the answer they want, right? You have to show that you can use them. So for example, one time we were doing construction on the uranium processing facility project, and they found a bulldozer that was buried under the site. Okay, well, you know, if they'd asked me for photographs of that, I could have shown them where that bulldozer was buried. We keep records of that kind of thing. Like I said, we keep records if a raccoon gets stuck in an air vent. So bulldozing a big bulldozer getting buried is something that we probably could have helped them find before they hit it. Things like that. So, and you know, and begging for money to move along projects. So for example, I'm working on getting a machine that will safely digitize all of our 16mm film, right? Like I said, they're incredibly important historical films, particularly since a lot of this research is being renewed lately. There's a lot of interest in things like molten salt reactors, and wouldn't it be great if we could look at the construction of those salt reactors, right? So I'm asking for money to get this machine so that we can digitize all these things. Well, in the meantime, I'm having to digitize them on not a great machine just to show the great response we get when we do have a film that we can, you know, clear for public release and give to the public, and suddenly they're very happy and they've never seen this research before. You know, it's been there since 1968. We can show that to you. So you're having to justify your existence a lot of the time and come up with kind of shoestring ways of proving your value, right, to get the things you need to continue to do your job well. So even if you're in a well-funded place, even if you're well thought of, we understand the value of archives, you're still begging for money. So you just, you know, justifying your existence, I'd say is a difficult part of the job, especially when you need really expensive machine, and they don't want to buy it.
I think too, there's, if you tell someone that you're a doctor, people have a very specific perception of what a doctor is. If you say that you're a librarian, people have another specific perception, which is maybe that you shelf books. So I think that justifying your existence and having to explain what you do is a consideration, and it can be challenging at times. And then echoing the burnout piece too, I had a job before graduate school where every day I would look at the clock and it would be like 9 a.m. and I wish it were 5 p.m. And now every day I'm like, how is it already 5 p.m.? And I could keep working and go home and keep working, but having to take care of myself and not do that, especially in a supervisory role. I think another thing to consider is that for libraries and archives and museums, we strive to be inclusive, and we serve, like at UT, the libraries are here for all students, not just one academic department or undergraduate or graduate students. But with that, we also need to examine ourselves as a profession and try to be more inclusive. Right now, librarianship is predominantly white and predominantly female, and people of color leave the profession or enter and leave the profession at much higher rates. I think that's a challenge that as a profession we need to think about.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? I've got one more that I want to questions. So we'll have one more question and then open it up just for some more informal mingling if anyone wants to talk one-on-one with someone. I'm sure everybody would be okay to stick around for a couple of minutes. But the last question is just, what is some advice that you have for students who are interested in entering this field? What is maybe something that you wish you would have known?
When I was an undergraduate, one of my jobs as a journalism major was interviewing other students, and one of the students that I talked to said that he came to college with his passions, and through those passions he found his major. And I think for a lot of people it's the opposite way. It's like, oh, I want to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a business major, instead of thinking like, I really like numbers or finance. So think about the things that are really interesting to you and then use that to map out your career rather than maybe starting the other way. I think I started the other way. I was like, I like writing, I should be a journalist, instead of thinking about all the different ways that I could use that. And be willing to reach out and talk to people. I think I've really benefited when I was thinking about libraries of just informally talking to people, getting coffee with them, or going to shadow them and see what their job was like. And if anyone is interested in doing that here with the UT libraries, I'd be happy to be a resource for that.
Yeah. I guess one thing I would say is learn how to use an Excel spreadsheet.
100%.
Try to teach that to all the high school volunteers that come in, because they don't apparently teach Excel that often in high school. But I would say learn the admin and business end of whatever kind of business you want to go into, because there are so many opportunities within both libraries and scientists that you, libraries and museums that you wouldn't think of at first. Like, we have people who just plan events at our museum. They don't necessarily need an art background to do that. They might enjoy art and have a passion for it as a hobby, but they plan events, or they do our finances, or they, are work in our archives. So there's a lot of variety that you can do and still work in a museum or a library, helping them do the things that they need to do, and you already have that passion for helping that kind of organization progress, and that goes a long way no matter what you're doing.
I would say find a way to have an opportunity to do the type of work that you're going to do, that you want to do before you go to school, because it's like a lot of time and a lot of money. If you go and get your master's in information science, then you're like, boy golly, I hate this, right? And so I feel like most of the folks that I was in school with were either working in libraries or working in museums or library adjacent, or they were in school libraries, like they were working in the field. and then getting their master's degree. And that's a thing that's very easy to do, right? Like you could go get a part-time job in the children's library at the like downtown library, right? Or you could get, you know, have some kind of work experience and know what you think about the environment, either through an internship and internship supports, even if it's an unpaid internship, or work study jobs. We have a lot of work study students. We're hoping to get some interns from UT SIS next year for doing some archive work at my library. So those internships and opportunities and jobs exist, and you should like try and work them before you commit to doing it. It's a lot. School's a lot. I don't know if y'all feel like school is a lot, but when I was in your position, I felt like it was a lot. So find an opportunity to do the work. And then I think also my other advice that I've given at other things is that you deserve to be here and you belong here. I think I'm a first generation college student and I would have benefited if somebody told me that, right? Like you deserve to be here just as much as anyone else, regardless of your background. And you can do it even if it feels awful and like suffering, which hopefully it doesn't for you, but it did for me. So it's transparency, I guess. That's my, spiel.
Okay, usually there's two pieces of advice I give, and the first one is don't be afraid to get thrown into the deep end. My first job as a digital archivist, I developed an entire system and I was only halfway through library school, right? The base of the fact of the matter is you know how to learn, right? Your studies aren't necessarily going to teach you, you know, this is exactly how you do this one little piece of your job, right? Things change over time. They're not going to teach you to just code in C++, which is ancient, right? Right? Yeah. They're not going to just teach you to code in C++ and that's going to be your daily job, right? You know, in your education experience, what you're really learning to do is learn, right? And take on, you know, the foundations of certain fields. So don't get bogged down in, I'm not learning how to do an Excel spreadsheet in my classes and why can't I? You can learn, you know, just, you know, don't be afraid to get thrown into the deep end. You're going to figure it out and everything's going to be fine. Okay, I promise. Everything is going to be fine. That's usually the number one piece of advice I give. Everything's going to be fine. The other thing is that the fields are evolving so much, and often they don't, you know, there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of institutions that don't necessarily know that they need an information professional or, you know, somebody with a writing background or, you know, somebody with a certain skill set, right? So they don't know they need you. You have to learn to sell your skill set, right? Y12 didn't know they needed an archivist until somebody said, this is what archivists do, right? Oh, we need one of those. And then they hired one. And then Lawrence Livermore hired one just like me. Probably a little different than me. I've never met her. But that's the other thing, is being able to describe what you do and selling your skill set to people who don't know that they need you. Because they do. They need you, and everything's going to be just fine.
So I second everything that these folks said because a lot of it would have been exactly what I said. But I will just add to it that be really flexible. In school, you're learning a certain skill, you're learning a certain topic, you're becoming, you know, very, you know, an expert in whatever the classes that you're taking. But once you get out into the workforce, you have to be flexible with what you can do. There's been more than one instance where I was hired to do a job at a certain organization, and I looked around at the organization and I said, nobody is helping to develop this web application. You know what, I'm pretty good with computers, I can figure that out. And then I did project management for a web application. I have no computer science training whatsoever. Never took a single class in computer science, but I saw the need, was clever enough to fill the gap. I learned how to install art. I've been installing art and hanging art shows for forever. I know how to swing a hammer. I know how to paint a wall. I know how to patch and paint. I know how to like Tetris some pedestals into a weird storage unit. Anything that you can do to kind of enhance your skill and then build your skill, that is, gonna make you valuable to wherever you're going and whatever organization. Just be prepared to roll up your sleeves and say yes to whatever it is, and pick it up as you go, because there's more that you'll learn when you're on the job. And I know I'm at an academic institution, but there's more that you'll learn on the job that will help you kind of move through your next steps than you'll ever really get necessarily in school. Like, knowing how to work Excel spreadsheets. I love color coding and I love filing. I mean, it just brings me such great joy. So learn those kinds of things that seem kind of dull and seem kind of boring and less creative. That's what will make you invaluable and help you kind of move through your career. And then the last thing I would say is learn how to communicate beyond your where you think you are, and learn how to communicate with people of all types, all levels, all age groups, all backgrounds, because the better you're able to write, to talk to people, to mind your manners and be polite, all of that will help you kind of move through, because people remember that stuff, especially the writing piece. If you can't write and craft a nice email or letter, you're not going to be able to do much of anything at all. And if you know how to talk to the CEO and the director and the person who's doing custodial services and the guy who's delivering your UPS and the lady who's dropping off your catering, you know how to communicate across all those different lines, that'll help you go really far too, because those people will help you get even more done at your job.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been great. We'll end it here. If you did not sign in up at the front, there's a computer. If you could just swipe your card or type in your email on your way out, I would really appreciate that, so we can just capture who is here today. There's also information. This is part of the Career Conversation series. If you weren't familiar with this, we do these types of panels all year long, focusing on different industries and fields. So there's information on that same table on some of our other panels and events that we're having the rest of the year. So feel free to grab some of those. Let's give a hand for our panelists. They're wonderful. And I'm sure that they'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to connect individually. Thank you guys so much.
Librarian Museum people are the coolest people. So.
Yeah, we are.
Clearly.
I was like, figuring out everyone's jobs. I'm like, yeah, this is great. I love all the stuff we do.
I'm like, man, your job is so neat. I want to do that too.
I'm like, I'm going to go to that exhibition.
Yeah.